You see, the very next day, after Halloween, she had been stabbed multiple times in the chest and neck. So this happened about a decade ago, back when I was 13 years old. I remember that my friend and I were excited about our first time trick-or-treating without our parents present. We lived in a small town, and nothing ever happened, so we figured it'd be the same that night. It started out like any other Halloween. We collected candy, ran into many of our classmates, and just had a lot of fun. At 8 p.m., we realized we had to head home. But before heading back, we decided we wanted to stop at our teacher's house. Turns out she wasn't home, though, and to add to the spookiness, there wasn't many streetlights on her street. Most of the other houses had all their lights turned off too, and their Halloween decorations taken down. That's when we saw a man emerge from underneath one of the few streetlights that were on. It was a police officer. Neither of us seemed to notice him before this, possibly due to all the streetlights being out. He startled us, but he seemed very friendly. The cop introduced himself and pointed to an inconspicuous bungalow. He said that an older man living in the house was inviting trick-or-treaters inside. Someone had called the police, but when he arrived, no one was answering the door. He kept telling us his police car and partner were just around the corner. We would look, but we couldn't see them. I was a pretty paranoid kid. Growing up, my mom loved watching crime shows, and she'd always tell me little tidbits and lessons that she learned. One of these lessons was a story about fake cops. Although I don't recall the details, I do remember hearing about people that pretend to be cops in order to gain trust from their potential victims. Throughout this whole exchange, I was terrified. His lack of a badge, police car, and partner just didn't feel right. I was also pretty conflicted because he was smiling the whole time, and he seemed like he was just trying to help. That was until we heard his strange request. He said that he needed to speak to this potential predator and that he needed our help for it. Since we were young girls, the man would answer if we knocked. The officer claimed he would hide behind the bushes next to the door. He would wait for him to invite us in, jump out, and catch him red-handed. At that moment, I knew my friend felt the same way I did. We both fell silent, but one of us managed to ask if we could discuss this first. The cop said yes, but told us that we had limited time. The street was completely silent, and he could hear everything we were saying to each other. I remember the feeling of wanting to say something, but fearing that he could hear us and it escalating the situation. We just looked at each other for what felt like forever. The cop was getting increasingly impatient and told us that we had to decide quickly. Around that moment, a family came down the street and noticed the police officer. They were coming over to see what was happening, and that's when the cop said he'll be right back and to not go anywhere. My friend and I scrambled to collect our thoughts and decided then to run away. We sprinted down the street and didn't look back. On our way home, we discussed theories that ranged from him being a fake cop, him playing a prank on us, or maybe him being a real cop, but we just misunderstood the situation. When we told our parents, we downplayed it a lot and doubted our own experience. In the end, we didn't call the police, but our dads did drive us to the house and the area around the house. No cop cars, no police officers in sight. Years later, I can say I regret not calling the actual cops. At the time, my friend and I were convinced we just misunderstood what happened. We even told our class about it the next day, and most, including our teacher, thought that it was not alarming. Looking back, I find it extremely strange that a police officer would put two children in such a potentially dangerous situation. I always wonder what his intentions were that night, but unfortunately, I guess that'll remain unsolved. This incident happened to me last Halloween. My little brother and I were home alone since our parents had gone out to a Halloween party. They had tasked us with handing out candy to trick-or-treaters. This honestly bummed me and my brother out because we had made plans to go trick-or-treating with a few friends. Our parents told us that we were too old to still be trick-or-treating, and that we could instead invite our friends over to the house and hang out here. Unfortunately, my friends declined the invitation as they still wanted to go trick-or-treating. So that just left me and my brother home alone, handing out candy. A lot of people stopped by our house, and by 10 p.m., almost all the candy was gone. That's when my brother and I decided we would turn off the porch lights and eat the rest ourselves. We were sitting on the couch watching a scary movie, stuffing ourselves with candy, when we heard a knock on the door. I stormed off the couch, wondering who the heck could be knocking on our door this late. I assumed that it was just some late-night trick-or-treaters. Even if that was the case, I turned off the porch lights, and the Halloween decorations were off, which should have been a dead giveaway that we were out of candy or not home. Being cautious, I looked through the peephole and saw some suspicious-looking man standing on our front porch. He was wearing a black hoodie with the hood pulled over his head. The only details I could really see of his face was that he had a beard and crusty-looking lips. There was no way this guy was a trick-or-treater. He wasn't wearing a costume, and he was far too old to be trick-or-treating alone. His hands were stuffed into the front pockets of his hoodie, and he also looked very thin. Every single red flag went off in my head about this guy. There's no way in hell I was going to open this door. Still looking through the peephole, I watched as he knocked again on the door. He seemed desperate for us to open up, and was shaking a bit, even though it wasn't cold out. Definitely not cold enough for somebody to be trembling like that. He was giving me a bad vibe, and I wanted to get rid of him as soon as possible. "We're out of candy," I shouted to the man. I watched as a smile spread across his face. It wasn't a friendly smile either. "Are you alone in there?" the man asked, in a dry, almost mocking voice. "Should I call the cops?" my little brother asked me, quietly gripping his cell phone. "Sounds like you're not alone in there," I heard the man reply. I continued to watch him through the peephole. His hands were still wedged tightly into his pocket, and he was still shaking quite a bit. I began to wonder if he was armed. I decided to take action and spoke to him in the most intimidating voice I could. "Get away from my house, or I'll call the police." His smile faded, and he bared his teeth at me, which were yellow like piss. He had a look of fury plastered on his face, but fortunately he left without trying to break in. I didn't stop watching him through the peephole until I saw he was completely off our property. My brother and I breathed a sigh of relief and decided not to call the police. We were a bit paranoid after this, but continued to watch TV until our parents came home. We decided not to tell them about the man, since he hadn't really tried to harm us. But now when I think back to this story, I do wish we called the police, because maybe we could have prevented a murder. You see, the very next day, after Halloween, we found out that an elderly woman who lived a few houses down from us had been brutally murdered. Her neighbor had found her lying on her front porch, covered in blood. She had been stabbed multiple times in the chest and neck. My brother and I immediately knew who had done it, and we told the police everything we knew. Unfortunately, they couldn't do much with the information that we gave them, since we hadn't really seen many details of his face. They went on a hunt for the man, but they never caught him. I blame myself for that poor old lady's murder, because I could have prevented it from happening just by calling the police. I think the most disturbing thing about all of it is the fact that he didn't take anything from her house. Her house was left untouched, but he could have gone in and taken anything he wanted. The front door was left wide open. That means he just wanted to hurt somebody. That was his only intention. He didn't want money or jewelry. He only had an urge to kill. When I was in middle school, a friend and I were allowed to go trick-or-treating by ourselves for the first time. We were super excited and waited until dawn to head out. We made our way halfway through the neighborhood when we decided to walk up to a new part of the development. The road itself that led to the new part of the neighborhood was dark, and it had no homes or lights on it yet. The entirety of the whole community was surrounded by woods for miles. We made it through the dark road fine and got to where all the new houses were. Everything was going great. They gave us the full-size chocolate bars and everything. Things got a little weird though when we decided to walk back home. We started our way through the dark road back to where we came from. Halfway through that road, though, I started to hear somebody walking up behind us. I thought this was strange because we hadn't seen any other trick-or-treaters while we were in the new area. I turn around, which prompts my friend to turn around as well, and there's an adult in a full-body ape costume walking up to us rather quickly. It was like they were trying to move fast, but also stay quiet at the same time. We both panic and start running to the nearest house. We make it up to the first house we see in the original part of the neighborhood, and the neighbor who answers can see that we're obviously scared. As we're standing there, telling her and her husband what happened, this person in the ape costume comes up to the door with an empty plastic bag, saying nothing. They're huge, at least 6 feet tall, towering over my friend and I. The woman then asks the ape if they're the person who scared us, and the ape person just stands there holding the bag out. The woman repeats herself, then makes a comment about how high school kids should not be trick-or-treating. But still, no response. That's when she tells us to come inside, and she closes and locks the door. We didn't see the person in the ape costume move a muscle until the door shut. That's when they started banging on the door over and over. The husband brings us to a room away from the front door, and the wife grabs a phone and yells out that she's calling the police. As she's on the phone with them, the knocking stops. The husband walks to the door and sees that they're gone. He tells us he'll drive us home just to be safe, and the cops stop at the neighbor's house to file a report. Nothing ever came from it, and they never found the ape man, of course. But I made sure to never walk through those woods with my friends ever again. About 7 years ago, when I was 10, We went trick-or-treating, just like most kids my age do. It was me, my little brother who was 6, and then my mom and my stepfather. This year, we went to a rather nice country club in town. There was a lot of huge mansion-esque houses side by side up that road. Figuring that the houses were close enough to the road for my mom to keep an eye on us, she let us get out of the car and go trick-or-treating by ourselves, while she and my stepfather drove alongside us. Me and my bro trick-or-treated like that for about an hour, and our bags were already full of candy. That's when he decided to call it quits and stayed in the car with our parents. I, however, wanted to hit up 1 or 2 more houses. The very last house I came to was all the way at the end of the street, where there was just a dead end after it. It was also a lot smaller than the other houses around it, and for a moment, I was really thinking about just calling it quits then. But that's when I saw several kids going up to the porch, and figured one more house couldn't hurt. When I got to the porch, there was an old man handing out Milky Way bars, my favorite, to a little girl and her mother. I waited behind them till they were done, then took my turn, saying trick or treat and everything. Then this guy just starts handing me handfuls upon handfuls of candy. Like, he was seriously pouring out the whole thing into my bag, to the point it was falling out. The little girl and her mother were standing right there, looking at the decorations, but as soon as they left and were out of earshot of this guy, he leans down and whispers, "So, where do you live?" He had this huge, creepy grin on his face. Me, being the dumb, gullible kid, laughed and said, "Sir, you should know where we live. We live in Wisconsin." This guy seriously just stared at me for a minute, like he wanted to facepalm. Right then, another kid and his parent came up to the door, so this guy tells me bye and turns to them, so I left. For the next few hours, I didn't think anything of it, until it finally snapped in my head what he was implying. And then I got super creeped out and could barely sleep that night. But still, all these years later, I still think about that whole bag of Milky Ways I got out of the whole situation. I think it was worth it in the end. Hey guys, Scary Stories here. I hope you enjoyed all the Halloween videos. I'm gonna throw up a compilation for you tomorrow, and then it'll be back to regular content. Do you ever notice that a lot of the creepy people in these stories always have these giant menacing smiles? It's weird. But yeah, if you're new here, I post videos like this every Thursday and Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. If you enjoyed the video, maybe give it a like. If you disliked it, give it a dislike. Subscribing always helps me out. And yeah, I really appreciate you spending your time here. Happy Halloween. Enjoy some candy, maybe a pumpkin beer or a pumpkin spice latte or something like that. And I'll see you on the next one. Hope you have a good night. Bye for now.